Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 5th of August, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host today, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie from Scotland, and also Ben Rubin, who's in London. So let's get kicked off straight away. We've had terrible events over the weekend, and I'm going to look our audience in the eye today and say that if you were involved in any of the violence over the weekend, then I'm afraid to say that you are effectively a useful idiot playing into the hands of the state. Let's just have a look at some of the things that went on. And this is from a mainstream source, but it's all over the internet. And of course, what's actually happening is violence, which is escalated in all sorts of ways, but particularly for people to be throwing rocks and bricks at the police, totally unacceptable. We had damage to a Muslim stall here. Later on, there's a clip where somebody's actually on the ground being beaten with sticks, cars set on fire. The violence, of course, flaring up at many places across the country. People were out protesting peacefully, but overall, of course, all of the protests were branded by the violence. And I'm going to make a very strong statement to say that that violence is going to allow Keir Starmer to introduce draconian close down on the country willy-nilly. He's got a free hand to do it because people went out there, broke the law, damaged property, injured other people. And it was all on the cry that we don't want the amount of migration or immigration that we've got. We want our country back. But this is very simplistic. And if people really want their country back, then they've actually got to understand what is going on in the country and why. The man on screen at the moment has got part of it. He's talking about millionaires pursuing their vanity projects. But in reality, something much darker and deeper is actually happening, not only in UK, but worldwide. So let's stick at why the violent protest fails. And I've just brought in a number of points here, but the weekend violence allows the government to focus on the violence and not the underlying issues. Peaceful protests on this scale would have forced the issue of migration to be addressed because the peaceful protests could have been increased in scale and therefore the pressure on the government increased to deal with the question of migration and immigration. The weekend violence allows the government to introduce yet more draconian controls, police controls, courts, and also the censorship of free speech. And if we just bring in a few more here, the violence turns people against each other rather than acting together to challenge the crimes of the state, which they're actually protesting about in the first place. The violence turns the police against the public and against any mention, any criticism of the issue of immigration and migration. So this is self-censorship as a result of the people who got involved in violence. The violence doesn't hurt the state. Keir Starmer, well away from it, protected by the security of the state. What the violence did is destroyed the lives and property of innocent, hard-working people. So the message from the UK column today is please pay attention to this news because we're in very difficult and dangerous times in UK. And if you think the solution is violence, then you need to think again. Ben, welcome to the news. You've got some good news, I think, from Ireland.
Indeed, yes. Hello, everybody, and thank you for that, Brian. That was an excellent opening statement. And I would also like to thank Mike, who his opening statement on the news on Friday, because I think that he hit on some extraordinarily important issues, many of which you've just gone over again. So thank you both. There is some good and some bad. I'm not going to talk for too long about the situation that's unfolded over the weekend. The things I wanted to just draw your attention to were, first of all, in Northern Ireland, we've seen quite a remarkable development as a nation that has seen probably the most bloody and deeply entrenched sectarian violence seen anywhere on earth over the past few centuries. has seen two previously warring factions reunite on the streets. We've got the Republicans and the Unionists coming out and standing together and saying, we are united, we are Irish, we are going to push back against what the globalists are trying to do to our country. And we've got a short piece of video we're going to run now.
We will stand together for our children, for our children. We will stand together. This is an uprising. This is the uprising. We have had enough. We have had enough. This is an uprising. We have had enough. We will be controlled. This is an uprising.
So that's an historical moment there, I think. That's just the start, but we'll see how that develops. And actually, that kind of unity and that focus on the authorities needs to be the approach taken, not just in Ireland, but everywhere else, I think. That's incredibly important. There are a lot of people online and elsewhere who are really trying to sow seeds of division. We've seen the likes of Lawrence Fox coming out in an incredibly irresponsible fashion, talking about the need to remove Islam from the United Kingdom. I mean, these statements are just designed to provoke. It's completely uncalled for. And potentially could be something that the police should be looking into, I think, with Fox, but then also on the other side of the debate as well, with this tweet from Nick Louds that I saw pop up, where he's basically saying, falsely, it turns out, reporting that acid has been thrown out of a car window at a Muslim woman in Middlesbrough, which is really just an incitement to violence to the Muslim community. That turned out to be false. He hasn't taken it down. We have to stop this from either side, deliberately trying to escalate this situation before it gets worse.
Okay, thank you for that, Ben. Well, I'm going to bring our audience into the meat of what's happening and reasons for why. Let's just have a little look at this clip, more of the troubles, but then we have Yvette Cooper speaking to the country.
They are scenes that are now happening daily in towns and cities across the country. In Liverpool, police officers coming under attack from a far-right mob. A number of officers injured as they dealt with what was described as serious disorder. Police in running battles with some of those in the city streets. They knew protests were planned, but images show the scale of the crowds. And this just a few miles from Southport, where the attack on children at a dance class seemingly lit the fuse. Similar scenes in Nottingham, bottles thrown as fighting broke out. And in Blackpool, where more fighting broke out in the crowd, their loyalties very clear.
Any person organising or taking part in the procession is committing an offence.
In Belfast too, a hotel housing migrants was the target, leading to clashes with police. More than 24 protests have taken place across the country. Last night it was Sunderland that saw the worst of the violence, its streets bearing the scars today, and prompting this warning that those responsible will face action.
Well, the police need to lead operations in communities across the country where there has been both violent disorder and thuggery on the streets, which is completely unacceptable, completely damaging, and where the police need to know they have our full support, taking the strongest possible action, making sure that these criminals face the full force of the law.
So there we are, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, full force of the law to crack down on these people. She's interested in the violence, she's not interested in the immigration and the migration. And let's have a listen to illustrious Prime Minister Keir Starmer.
I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we've seen this weekend. Be in no doubt, those that have participated in this violence will face the full force of the law. The police will be making arrests, individuals will be held on remand, charges will follow, and convictions will follow. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder, whether directly or those whipping up this action online and then running away themselves. This is not protest. It is organised, violent thuggery, and it has no place on our streets or online.
So he's pretty good on thuggery on the streets, not so good on Jimmy Savile, but that's a debate for another time. But of course, who was the close friend, possibly puppet and string puller of Keir Starmer? Well, it was none other than Tony Blair, and that's where we need to focus. Let's have a look at this clip and remind ourselves.
When Tony Blair emerged from his North London home into the morning sunshine to head for the palace, he was almost swamped by well-wishers. And among the many emotional moments of the morning came one from older Labour stalwarts.
There's no question whatsoever, in my own opinion, of our having achieved this victory in '97 if it hadn't been for Neil's courage and determination in leading up to '92. And it gives me great pleasure publicly to be able to say that.
Thank you, Dick.
In a break with tradition signalling a determination to do things differently, the Blairs walked into Downing Street to be cheered by hundreds of party workers.
As I stand here before number 10 Downing Street, I know the huge responsibility that is upon me and the great trust that the British people have placed in me.
So why have we got Blair on screen? Well, have a look at this, because this is where we need to get back into history to discover what was going on. It's a report from the Migration Policy Institute, the immigration legacy of Tony Blair. And it says throughout this period, but particularly from 2001, Labour put migration at the centre of its energetic legislative programme. In the 10-year period under Blair's stewardship, Labour passed 4 migration-related parliamentary acts and a 5th parliamentary bill. This rate of lawmaking surpasses that of every other social policy area. So this is where the agenda for migration and immigration in this case, was generated. And of course, we're now suffering the effects. There was this interesting graph included in the article, and it was taking it back to immigration back to 1971. Initially, there was a net outflow, but we can then see in 1990 that it started to be a positive movement towards more immigration into the country. But even so, very low figures compared to the 600,000 today. So let's have a look at Yvette Cooper, Home Secretary, and how she reacted when she was challenged back in 2013 on the subject of immigration.
Do you believe that immigration is too high?
Well, we said that the pace of immigration was too fast, so it is right to bring the level down, and that's why we've actually supported some of the measures that the government has introduced. For example, greater restrictions on people who were coming here with high qualifications but actually were coming to do lower skilled jobs. So yes, there are things like that you should do, because I think, you know, we recognise there were things that we did, for example, around not having transitional controls on Eastern European migration, which we should have done.
But when you say the pace of immigration was too high, does that mean you think immigration was too high under Labour and it's too high now?
Well, as I said, we do think that the level should come down. That's why we're supporting some of these measures that the government's introduced. But I think you've also got to look at what kind of immigration.
You never seem to use the phrase.
Well, actually, I just did. Actually, I just did. I
Is
just
immigration
did,
too high?
and I talked about actually because you had the problem, for example, of not having transitional controls for Eastern Europe. But you've also got to look at what kind of immigration that you have. So I think, for example, illegal immigration has been a growing problem. There should be much stronger action to deal with that, and the government's not doing that. But at the same time, what the government is doing is putting off legitimate university students who bring billions of pounds into this economy. So you've got to look at the kind of immigration as well as the level, as well as the pace.
If you think immigration must come down, by how much should it come down?
Well, I think there is a problem with the approach the government's taking, because they've set this target for net migration, which in practice includes a lot of British citizens. So, for example, the way in which net migration has fallen over the last few years.
So Labour, will not answer the question, and the reason she won't answer the question is because the problem which we now face today has been created by the political parties as part of a much deeper agenda. Are the Tories any better? Let's have a look.
Immigration figures now, and Rishi Sunak has been forced to admit the number of people migrating legally to the UK is too high. The figure for net migration has reached a record high of just over 600,000 last year. It's a big increase on the previous year and comes despite repeated government pledges to bring migration down. But Mrs Sunak denies he's lost control of the issue. Our deputy political editor Anushka Asthana has more.
It is a promise you will have heard.
Net migration to this country will be in the order of tens of thousands each year.
Again.
We do want to bring net migration down to sustainable levels.
And again.
And we will have a system that is finally subject to proper democratic control.
13 years and 5 Conservative Prime Ministers later, they're still saying it, but with a bit less confidence.
Numbers are too high. It's as simple as that, and I want to bring them down.
And no wonder. When the Tories regained power in 2010, net migration was 256,000. After a dip because of the pandemic, numbers hit an all-time high of almost 500,000 in 2021. Today's 606,000 breaks that record, taking us some way from that tens of thousands. Made up of 1.2 million people coming to the UK and more than 550,000 leaving, the rise has been driven by students, work visas, and humanitarian schemes, including for Ukraine. So what are they going to do about it?
Well, of course, he wasn't going to do anything much about it, but we're now seeing the root of the problem, which so many people who are out on the streets simply do not understand, that this is a created problem. It's been created across the Labour Party and the Conservative parties. This is a much deeper agenda. Where can we go for a glimpse of that agenda? Well, of course, we have to go to the UN, and we'll look at migration, which is encouraged by the UN, and the name which came to my mind immediately was Peter Sutherland. Here's Peter Sutherland at the Bilderberg 2013 meeting, and of course Ed Ball's husband of Vivek Cooper, also at that same meeting. Why are we interested in Mr. Sutherland? Because he said effectively the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to undermine the homogeneity of European countries. This is a planned agenda, and the agenda is to destroy the United Kingdom as a nation state. Our target should not be the immigrants who have come in through the open door. We should be looking at the treasonous, in my opinion, politicians who've opened the door to this unsustainable mass migration. Diane, welcome to the news today. Very serious news. There's lots of information to cover, but you've also been looking at agenda, political agenda, which is coming into the UK.
Brian, hello, and hello, Ben, as well. I wanted to just review the Sustainable Development Goals as we know them. Debbie talked about them on Friday, and Debbie Evans talked about how they are actually unsustainable. So what Debbie and I talked about this over the weekend, and you can look up the Sustainable Development Goals yourself. They're all over the internet, but what we have created is 17 unsustainable goals. And I wanted to show how this sort of translates into the migration issue, because migration is throughout these goals. So the 17 goals, as we sort of translated them into ways that normal people will understand. I'll just read them quickly because I think they're very important. You will be poor. You will eat bugs. You will be modified. You will be indoctrinated. You will have no gender. You will drink recycled water. You will use smart meters. You will use CBDC. You will use smartphones. You will have no borders. You will not travel. You will be hungry. You will not breathe. You will not fish. You will live online. You will be censored. You will live in 1984, and ultimately you will not be sustained. It's not about them. It's about you. It's about us. So from here, I wanted to show a video that is from the International Organization for Migration, which is associated with the UN. They're based in Geneva. And just to show you a little bit about what they are saying about the relationship between these unsustainable goals, the 2030 Agenda, and migration.
By embracing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, we have an unmissable opportunity to harness the development potential of migration, to support beneficial outcomes, starting with reducing inequalities and putting the right policies in place to ensure safer, more orderly and regular migration. Migration has been a long-standing coping strategy for people to pull themselves out of poverty, to cope with lack of basic infrastructure or search for better opportunities. People's reasons to move can also be influenced by conflict, natural hazards, or environmental conditions linked to climate change. And in a global context of rapid urbanisation, movement of people is increasingly taking place to cities and urban areas, enriching local communities and societies, both where migrants are and where they come from. The knowledge, skills and experience that migrants bring and gain in new places contribute to the labour force in key sectors such as health and play a vital role in building diverse and productive societies. Migration can empower women economically and socially and help people realise their personal aspirations and educational potential. This encourages innovation, which benefits science, technology and industry. With increased earnings, migrants are able to send financial support to family members back home. This is critical to help reduce hunger and strengthen the resilience and sustainability of poorer communities. But none of these benefits are guaranteed. We can only achieve all of this by upholding human rights, fostering peace and security, ensuring equal access to justice and protection from exploitation for all. We also need to build strong partnerships in our cities, within our countries and regions, and globally through international cooperation. Migration is everyone's business. Together, we can ensure that we leave no one behind.
So we can see a couple of things in that video. We see the Sustainable Development Goals, the little sort of cartoony pictures, not just the people, but the cartoony pictures that are part of the original Sustainable Development Goals infographic, which I have sort of taken the liberty of reworking, as I said previously. So Sustainable Goal Development 10, I have called You Will Have No Borders. They call it Reduce Inequality Within and Among Countries. And this basically consists of making sure that people who are originally from poorer countries or, countries that are different from Western cultures, essentially, are the same or have the same access to things, are essentially the same. So we could go into communism here in a way, compared to those of us who are in more wealthy countries, as they call it. So they talk a little bit about COVID, they talk a little about other things, but it doesn't really apply as much as, certainly not COVID, but certainly the difference between people coming from Africa, Asian countries, and so on, and what this means for the West. They don't really focus on that as much as they focus on the fact that we're supposed to be taking people in from other countries to make things more equal for everyone. So the International Organization for Migration has a graphic that is similar to the original graphic from the UN, and it shows specifically how migration relates to all sustainable goals, all 17 of them. And you can read those on your own if you really want to, but they do have the same images and the same pictures that are in the original version. And there's a lot of documentation out here, which I will put into the show notes. I'll just give you a taste of some of this so I don't go into too much detail. They talk specifically in a lot of their documentation about the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. They talk about the contribution of migrants for inclusive growth. So there's that language again, the inclusion, the diversity, the things that what we're all supposed to be concerned about, apparently, according to the UN and other organizations. We talk a lot about safe, orderly, regular migration. There's a lot about peace and security, which Debbie Evans talked about on Friday again as well. So there's the peace and security throughout. So we see, again, a lot of this language coming up over and over again. If we look at the specifics to Sustainable Development Goal 10, reduced inequalities, or as I've called it, you will have no borders, you will have no identity, you will have no culture. 10.7 with some details on how this is going to be done is to facilitate orderly, safe, regular, and responsible migration and mobility of people, including through the implementation of planned and well-managed migration policies. And so this goes into some more detail again as to how we're going to do this. By 2030, we will reduce to less than 3% the transaction costs of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. So we're doing what we can to decrease the cost and increase the number of people that are being moved around, essentially. This is about replacement migration. So this replacement migration document is from the UN. It's something like 350 pages long with an incredible amount of detail in different languages. So you can look that up yourself, but just basically a couple of points from the executive summary, which is to say this is what they're doing is moving people around to address the solution of aging populations. And you can see also in that graphic as well the details of how the UK will result in a couple of different scenarios going up to 2050. So if we look at 2050, if we have no migration, if we have migration along with replacement and so on, the descendants of people who migrated here, and to show how that influences the population of the UK. The World Migration Report 2024 is another 300-page document. We see that the countries separated out by men and women, the people who have left their native countries and where they have gone to. Now, you can see, obviously, the United States of America has by far the most. They are much bigger than the UK, obviously, physically. I would say a lot of those do also as well come from Mexico due to the crisis that they have at the southern border at the moment that Kamala Harris was supposedly in charge of for the past 4 years, but never did anything about that. But we see the UK does have quite a few coming in, especially in relation to the size of the UK and the population, the indigenous population that was already here in the first place. The strategic plan for the International Organization of Migration from the UN from 2024 to 2028 for the next 4 years. So this is just the start of it. Has all of these different reasons for migration. The Global Compact for Migration is something that the heads of states from around the world who are UN member states agreed to. There is a website where you can read specifically what the UK has done in relation to the Global Compact for Migration. They've very much bought into it, despite the Tories in recent years talking about how they were going to control migration. We can see what's actually truly happened. So there's a lot of detail about that and how this all works together. So this is coming in the next 4 years. Again, there's more information. There's entire databases that you can look at, geospatial information about. This is specifically for developing countries and their data about what's going on in their countries. So this is more for countries like Haiti and other countries that have people leaving more than the countries where they are coming into. Again, a huge database there. We have some other things here as well from the strategic plan. The idea of leaving nobody behind, the Sustainable Development Goals. Where is this coming from? Well, it's coming from a lot of sources, but the plan of sustainability, which, as we know, means unsustainability, is really what we're trying to do. But they use the excuses for things like we're trying to decrease poverty, we're trying to deal with climate change, we're doing all these things, basically using other sustainable development goals or unsustainable goals to make it a difference, so to show that migration is somehow going to be a solution to some of these problems that they feel that they have determined exist out there. There's another 300-page document here, a guide for practitioners on how to actually implement migration issues for states and cities around the world, for practitioners who are actually doing the work, designed to serve government actors, as it says there, and how to integrate sustainable development goals into their migration plans in individual countries. Next, we have here some more information. The next slide, please. So now we are into the World Economic Forum. And of course, if you look at something at the UN, you can also probably find it on the World Economic Forum. So I just wanted to make this clear to show just how broad this is. This was from Davos, again, making that connection between migration and sustainable development and how migration can lead to sustainable development and address issues like floods and all of the weather issues. It talks about water issues, like we don't have water issues in the UK already. So the World Economic Forum has as well climate change information, adaptation strategies to climate change, as we can see on the next slide, please. And we also have King Charles and his, as we know, devotion to climate change. So this was him visiting the UN in Nairobi in relation to climate action and climate protesting and what we need to do. So King Charles, of course, is at the center of all this, the head of everything. And of course, we have to look at this role of the Great Reset as well. And what the Great Reset book said specifically around migration, that basically the wealthier countries have to work with the most fragile countries, which will consist in a new wave of mass migration in its direction, like those that occurred in Europe in 2016. So this is what was published by Klaus and with Charles himself, of course, in the background. So Charles said in September 2020 at the WEF Sustainable Development Impact Summit that we need a Marshall Plan to tackle the environment. And what does he mean by this? Well, I think we have just a short clip from him to hear what he said at that conference.
I've been deeply encouraged by the positive response that we've received from around the world, inspired by the Great Reset's call to action. And this is why I called for a Marshall-like plan for nature, people, and planet.
So that's King Charles now, and just to reiterate that final point, Brian, and to go back to what you've said at the beginning and what Ben has said, is that we need to refocus where our targets are. They don't need to be on each other. They don't need to be a member of the British public that feels certain ways. We have to look at where this is coming from, and this is a much larger agenda that we have to look at in a different way, I believe.
Diane, thank you very much for that excellent report. And well, you've demonstrated absolutely that the idea that immigration as a subject and with target figures, that this is being debated and produced in the Labour's manifesto, for example, is complete nonsense. This is globalist policy which is being enacted in UK without any debate in Westminster and any debate within the Labour Party itself. And this is the betrayal of the nation, and we have to get this information across to the people who think the way to deal with globalist agenda is violence on the streets. It's education we need. And on the subject of education, I want to take people back to, I think it's 2016, where an author called Christopher Story was being interviewed. Let's have a listen.
A major part of this strategy since 1961 has consisted of building slowly and installing a very dictatorial regional world government over all of Europe, on top of the existing socialist bureaucracies that are in the governments of each of these countries, over all of Europe, and now sadly also Britain, in the form of the European Union. And this constitutes an accomplishment of Leninist strategy, as predicted by Golitsyn. And of course, while the KGB had infiltrated all the European governments and the British government, as they had infiltrated the American CIA and other parts of the United States government, in addition to that, the current treaty arrangements between the European Union, based in Brussels, and the new Russia, mean that there's even further, tighter Soviet and KGB control over the foreign policy of this new globalist regional government that controls Russia, that controls Europe, and controls Britain.
I don't disagree with any of that.
So Christopher Story, we'll hear more from Christopher Story in just a few seconds, but of course he is agreeing with that it's the globalist agenda that is driving politics in the world. So let's hear what Christopher Story had to say in response to the opening gambit by the interviewer.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Now, let me describe the European Union, what it really is. It is a political collective. So all these British politicians who constantly talk about the need to be in the centre of Europe and the need to influence, for Britain's great experience to be used for the benefit of the Europeans so that they, so that we can influence what they do, are completely wasting their breath. They are insulting our intelligence. This is a political collective. In a political collective, decisions are taken collectively. No individual nation can take any decisions. Now,
So it destroys the sovereignty completely of all the individual nations.
We have no sovereignty. We have no interests. And we have politicians in Westminster who talk about British interests. We have delegated and collectivized those interests. Now, there are a few residual peculiar exceptions. For example, there's a thing called the Common Foreign and Security Policy, which is part of the collectivization process. Well, Britain flouted that policy by joining the United States in respect of this Iraqi operation. But we shouldn't have done that. The Europeans didn't know what to do and threw up their hands in horror. But this will probably be the last chance we'll have if we don't get out of it.
So a pretty direct warning as to what we're dealing with. We're dealing with collective politics, which is beyond national governments. He was focusing on the European Union, but of course the European Union itself is controlled by those globalist powers above it. One more part of this clip, and then I'm going to take you into detail of why we should pay attention to what Christopher Story was warning about.
This business of controlling all the political parties and allowing them to adopt different names, this was a conscious policy which was laid down by Gorbachev and Yeltsin at the 28th Party Congress in July 1990. Both Gorbachev and Yeltsin made speeches in which they said to the comrades, now is the time to follow whatever path you feel would be most appropriate. In a nutshell, that's what they said. We have the two quotes in my book, the European Union Collective. So that's what I call democratism, which is the creation and maintenance of the illusion of democracy. Now that pattern is being implemented in the European Union because by various means, almost all the participants, even at national level, in the political process, are selected for the job or are, appointed or are chosen. Now, it's quite difficult to explain this, but in Britain there's an extremely lethal piece of legislation which requires all political parties to register at a central registration point, and it basically dictates what the political parties can and cannot do. But in the European, at the European level, no political party can participate in the European Parliament if it's not 100% signed up to the idea of the European project.
And submission to the authority of this regional world government based in Brussels, which is now imposing dictatorial controls on a daily basis down to the most minute level of business and human activity on all residents of Europe and increasingly in Britain. And if you read the Financial Times newspaper, you see examples daily and in the Wall Street Journal of how the European Union is trying to tell people and businesses in the United States what they will do.
That's quite true. When Gorbachev visited London briefly for a day on the 23rd of March 2000, and during that visit he made a statement which I repeated at every opportunity. He acknowledged and stated that the European Union is the new European Soviet.
The European Soviet, which of course Keir Starmer wants us to be buried into deeper than we are at the moment. UK column warning about Brexit without the exit, and that's the key situation. Now, for the astute members of our audience that have said yes, but it's not the Russians driving it, absolutely correct. And of course, Christopher Story went on later after that period to talk about the higher powers. But let's focus on the warnings he gave us as to what was going to be done for society. And I'm going to bring on screen, this is the title of his book, The European Union Collective, Enemy of its Member States. And early in the book, shown on the right of the screen, is a table which I'm going to take you into now, because this, revealed by a then KGB defector, talked about a plan to destroy UK and Western societies. It started out with demoralisation. Religion was going to be weakened and made into a spiritual desert, emptiness and ignorance. Education was going to be zero historical knowledge and complete ignorance. Media, political correctness, groupthink, Luciferian fog, culture, addictive fads, salacious and empty culture, mumbo-jumbo, ape speech. All of these things, in my opinion, have come to pass, and this is why we should pay attention to the detail warning in this book. Law and order to be made legislated, imposed, inconsistent, with an unwarranted bias in favour of the offender, victimisation of the victim. Absolutely correct, and we've given that a big green tick. Social relations to be reduced to rights, not obligations, to erode individual responsibility. That has happened. Security, the police and the military to be weakened to a point where that we are effectively defenceless, and we cannot act unless we're in cooperation with other powers. Internal politics to be made aggressive, poisonous party antagonisms, a sense of drift, a failure to get to grips with issues, constant lying and equivocation, careerism and egoism. That is all correct. Foreign relations, entanglement in an ever-expanding net of multilateral treaties. All of this has been done to the UK, and it's reduced us to the state that we see ourselves in. But it goes on. Family and society, fostering of breakdown, destroying marriage, health, the use of junk food, state-provided conditional health care. And the key one here, race, the mixing of races, the elevation of racism to Hitlerian level, the promotion of diversity, degradation of breeding, genetics versus the environment debate. What was all that designed to achieve? Hatred and divisions and evil compromises, and that has now exploded onto the streets. Population to be alienated from the countryside, to be urbanised, to be forced onto drugs, and to be made vulnerable to mass epidemics. That's a very interesting one. Labour problems in the labour force, trade unions versus society, quote here, public sector chaos, unquote. So all of these absolutely achieved, and following demoralisation, the warning was that we were to be destabilised. I'm going to treat these as a block, and here it says reaction to all of these breakdown policies, mobocracy, breakdown of law and order, rioting, street deaths, and that's exactly what we've experienced. And what was the ultimate goal? Well, the ultimate goal was described as normalization, but the average person can consider this as the implementation of a new form of communism. And that is a very accurate summary of what's actually happening in this country. And we've now been reduced through all of those individual attacks to where we are now, which is breakdown in the country and violence on the streets. So for people out there that still don't understand what they're up against, the idea is that you need to learn what you're up against, because it feeds off violence, and the more violence there is in this country, the tighter the lockdown of that communist control. And don't be fooled by the fact that Keir Starmer's in his suit and tie, because as Eric Pickles said, former communities minister for the Tories, Eric Pickles said, "I look like an unlikely revolutionary, but the revolution starts here." And I'm going to suggest to our audience that please join us for UK Extra today, because we're going to discuss in a lot more detail this vicious attack by the international political elite on the UK and other nation states. Well, serious news today, but if you like what the UK column is doing, then please join us. Please become a paid subscriber, because that small donation a month helps us do what we do, and we want to expand. Please share the information, and of course we are here on these platforms with the exception of Facebook, which is still effectively banning us for reasons best known to themselves. Anybody can purchase from the UK column shop. So if you feel that you'd like to help us, you can make a purchase with one of the items, and that will be very, very well received by the UK column team. We still have copies of Agenda 21, Your Life in Their Hands. Many people have bought this book from UK column, and we have huge amount of very positive feedback saying it's an extremely good analysis of how the global elite are putting their power base together. Now, positive things. On the 23rd, 26th of August, we've got Freedom Music Festival. This is from Hope, Sussex. Details are here, 4-day family event, and you can look online to actually see more details of the musicians and all the good things lined up. Now, Diane, I think you can help me with this one, because we've got an interview coming out tomorrow, 6th of August at 1 p.m, which is Craig Houston.
Yes, Brian, thanks. He actually says Craig Houston. I think that's the Scottish or Glaswegian version of that name. He's a really amazing podcaster. I really like his work. He talks about Scottish politics and in relationship to the UK. And I think it will just be a good way of especially those of us in Scotland, but anyone else involved in UK politics and understanding the relationship with the devolved nations to Westminster. I think it will be hopefully an enjoyable thing for everyone to participate in and get some views on. He plans to stand in the 2026 Scottish Parliament election with an undecided affiliation at this point, because nothing suits him anymore. But I think it will be a very interesting conversation for the members.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Diane. Now, we'll also give people a reminder of the UK column on location. That's going to be in Bristol on the 9th of October 2024. Tickets are now on sale for that. More details will be released in due course, but we encourage people to come along and give us support. Also had an email saying that there's a peaceful rally coming up Wednesday, the 4th of September, 12 p.m, Parliament Square. We are sleepwalking into a dictatorship, so let's peacefully and lawfully unite against the selected, not elected, tyrannical, warmongering government and the unelected bureaucrats who control them. Can't disagree with that. And Fiona there has requested that we promote this rally on the 4th of September and encourage people to get out and about, and of course to talk peacefully to the policemen who will no doubt be on scene to say why the protest is taking place and why it's necessary. Ben, let's bring you back on, and I think the subject is net zero.
Absolutely, it is net zero, and actually the segment you just delivered there, Brian, that was really sobering stuff, but it's directly linked to what I'm going to talk about. We've talked about social transformation, and it's directly connected to climate change, the climate agenda, and the transition to a new energy system. Let's hear, to start with, from Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, the president of the Club of Rome.
So I think the main challenge for global leadership in this moment of the polycrisis is real fear. What we're seeing is the fact that leaders are not ready to confront challenges head on, and they're getting stuck in short-term knee-jerk responses to big crises that are hitting them, whether it be the pandemic or whether it now be conflict either in Gaza or Ukraine. And I think we need brave leadership. We need leaders who are ready to confront this fear and the fear-mongering that we're seeing from many different sides, especially the growing right wing, and really come forward with policies that embrace both a shift and a just transition and decarbonization, and also social equity policies. We need to see a lot from the upcoming European elections. First of all, we cannot slip into the current predictions of moving towards the radical right. The radical right is already now shaking things up against our nature protection law, indicating that we need to become more competitive like the United States, that this is not the time to move towards the European Green Deal, and that we need to simplify and even deregulate. And this is not possible. We actually have to move faster, but we can do it in a way which is smart and optimized. We can do it in a way that actually takes away the perversities in the market and shifts that capital towards green projects, towards social projects. We can do it in a way that actually taxes wealth rather than taxes people, and shift that wealth into the pockets of more people. Because what we're going to see is that if we have growing social tension, which is what we're seeing right now with the farmers actually in the streets, that is going to create such instability for our goals, whether they be green objectives or social objectives, that we could potentially see revolution.
So green and social objectives are two sides of the same coin. And the Labour government has come out very strongly, straight out the gate, and implemented its new project, the Great British Energy Company. This is one of their manifesto commitments. They're going to turn Britain into a clean energy superpower by setting up this organisation, by embracing energy dependence, getting away from the influence of the likes of Putin. 650,000 new high-quality jobs, most of those funded by the taxpayer, obviously, this being Labour policy. And this is roaring ahead, right? So this is a nationalised energy business, and it's just announced its new chairman. This is the first chairman. It is Jürgen Meyer, CBE, who spent 33 years at Siemens UK. Siemens is a World Economic Forum partner, so that demonstrates to you quite clearly what's behind this organisation, what's behind this agenda. It also explains why Herr Meyer is so keen on delivering what he calls a vibrant, green, fourth industrial technology revolution. This is from his LinkedIn profile. He's using the World Economic Forum language to describe his background, what he wants to see happen out there in the world. He's also been given the blessing of John O'Brien, who we've spoken about a lot previously. He's the founder of Anthropy, which is the WEF in the UK event. It happens once a year. And he describes Meyer as one of our most committed early anthropists. So this is who is controlling the new energy system that we're going to have to rely on to run the country over the coming years. It's worth referencing as well that he mentioned the Crown Estate, who are going to be partnering with Great British Energy. That means most of the profit from this endeavour, which is funded by taxpayers, is actually going to be going, first of all, to the state, but then also to the royal family. So that's who's actually going to benefit from this organisation being run by someone with a World Economic Forum background. And the promised benefits for citizens have already completely evaporated. So you may remember from the recent election campaign a promise of £300 a year off bills, which was actually something that Starmer came out and said himself. So he said this on X, that his Labour government is going to tackle the cost of living crisis through this new endeavour, but that's actually been reneged on. They've already stepped back from that commitment just in the past few weeks since the election. So it was essentially a lie. But who is going to benefit from this? Well, we know it's a public-private partnership. We've talked about the public side of it, the state and the royal family. Let's have a little look at the private market. So I'm going to talk about this organisation, Octopus Group, which is a private business focused on building industries that will change the world from their corporate website. They're quite complicated, big organisation. They've got 6 component parts in the core group. The first is investments, then energy, which I'm going to come back to, money. So they offer investment advice to retail investors. They also have something called Octopus Legacy, which is about estate planning for people after they die. It's a really odd mixture of different businesses here. Energy generation, which they then sold last year or in 21, I think it was, to one of their own subsidiaries. I'll come back to that in a moment. And then another organisation called SECO, which is about creating technology for financial advisors to run their businesses on. Again, a very strange mix, but it's run by this guy, and he explains that although it is a slightly strange mix, Octopus is full of people and organizations who share a common purpose. In his own words, that's the chief executive explaining what that organization is about, what Octopus is about, which is quite interesting because, as Brian has informed me, he sent this meme over to me earlier on today. Common purpose has been compared to an octopus in the past, right? So its operations and interests infecting every different part of the system. I think that we can probably agree that Octopus Group is doing a similar thing, and actually they have adopted the term agents of change, which is very common purpose language to describe themselves. This is a podcast series you can go and listen to hear about what they're up to. Now let's have a look at one particular agent of change. This is Greg Jackson, who's the chief executive of Octopus Energy. We'll be able to get my words out properly today, promise. And he says that their role is simple. They're about bringing about a sustainable global energy system faster and cheaper through technology. That's what Octopus are up to. Now let's hear from him about what he's particularly excited about.
The new government thinks the UK can double onshore wind power, treble solar and quadruple offshore wind by the end of the decade.
What matters for green growth is there's £100 billion of capital, more than that, waiting to be deployed in the UK. That's been going abroad because we can't build stuff here. That means that not only do you not get the jobs in construction and actually creating this infrastructure, but we don't benefit from the cheap electricity it'll bring as well. That's going to change.
So it's a £100 billion capital investment marketplace, public-private marketplace. That's really what's driving this, right? There's a huge amount of money to be made. Who are they funded by? Octopus Group. So we've talked about the holding company which owns them, Octopus itself, but also a bunch of international, Australian and Japanese energy companies, a company called Generation, which was founded by Al Gore, who's one of the kind of high priests of this sustainability movement. The Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board are also in there as well. They've been around for about 8 years now, but the growth has been absolutely staggering. So they started in 2016. By 2019, they had 1 million energy customers. By 2020, they were valued at $2 billion. Then by 21, that had increased to $5 billion, right? So you put on $3 billion of value in a year, apparently. And by 23, that had gone up to $8 billion. And they've been hoovering up a huge number of smaller independent energy companies. And actually, just a few months ago, this is back in May this year, they became the largest energy provider in the UK, actually overtaking British Gas in 8 years. It's absolutely astonishing that they've managed to achieve that. Maybe it's something to do with the common purpose of all of the people who work there and their professional and political connections. Who can say? They've certainly got a big PR push behind them. All of the mainstream media have lined up behind them saying how fantastic they are. They're really inescapable. Their advertising spend means that, I can walk down the street in London and see an Octopus LCD billboard, or they're on the tube, they're on the TV. They're absolutely all over the place. They've got this thing called the Fan Club, where local communities can get in touch and say, hey, build a fan for us in our area. So apparently 30,000 people around the UK have already applied for that. And that's where the big transformation of planning legislation is going to really kick in when they want to start building these all around the country. Luckily, though, they're very, very well politically connected, including into Tortoise Media. They actually sponsored the Tortoise Media election night party back on July the 4th, general election. You can see there Greg Jackson with James Harding, the guy that we've spoken about a lot, who hangs around in Davos. At Gold's House, and is former political editor of the BBC and an extraordinarily well-connected man. I'm sure he's been helping usher this agenda along for them. They're a big organisation. So this is Octopus Energy. Octopus Group has 6 companies. Octopus Energy has 9 within it, right? It's a huge ecosystem. I won't go into all of them because I don't have time, but I'm just going to focus on 2 today that I think are particularly important. First one is this, Kraken Tech. I should just draw your attention to the logo, by the way. That little eye there, to me, does not look like a friendly eye. If you're thinking about how you might want to represent your organization, that strikes me as a very odd logo to choose. But anyway, essentially, this is the operating system for the AI-enabled smart grid. This is the technology that they're going to use to run this new energy system. They're licensing it out to other companies. So they built it for themselves, but this is now being used by other energy businesses in the UK and all around the world to run their connected grid operations, right? So essentially, Octopus is becoming the de facto standard operating system, almost by stealth, for how the energy system runs. What does that actually mean? So here's a little article from them talking about what that actually looks like. This is written by Octopus. This is a thought piece that they've written. And essentially what they're saying is that we need to completely transform our approach to risk management, right? So we want to move decisions away from the center and give them to people that are closest to their respective processes. And apparently this might intuitively sound risky, but in fact, it's the opposite, according to this company. Instead of developing extensive plans that span many months, utilities can massively improve their innovation by continuously taking smaller incremental steps, basically applying a digital mindset to infrastructure investments. To really understand what this means, it's kind of terrifying. Like, I don't think that this is a good idea at all, but this is the agenda that they're pushing out into the energy system. This article goes on saying that true transformation comes when utilities are able to move beyond the belief that speed makes people more likely to miss something or make more mistakes. Well, I think that's just true, isn't it? The benefit gained in interacting fast and frequently with customers is higher than the risk mitigated through extensive upfront planning. That is a nightmare. Anyone who operates in the energy system, particularly in a risk or an operations role, will know that that is not correct, right? But this is being pushed down into the system by this organization, including by their new CEO, this guy, Amir Orad, who I believe is an American Israeli. Looks like he studied in Tel Aviv. So this is the person who's going to be running large swathes of the UK and the global energy system across this new technology platform. And then the second of the organizations I'm going to talk about is this one, which is the Centre for Net Zero, which is run by Lucy Yu, who I've spoken about several times in the past. Amongst other things, she is an advisor to the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. So this is absolutely Blair and a bunch of other organizations that she's part of. This is about what they call collecting and democratizing data from the smart grid. They've just issued this report. And you should go and read this. It's quite technical, but it's only about 8 pages long. And essentially what they're talking about is this idea of synthetic smart meter data. Right? So they say in the opening statement, access to granular demand data is essential for the net zero transition. Like, you have to have data to run your data-enabled system. Right? It allows for accurate profiling and active demand management as our reliance on variable renewable generation increases. And because our generation capacity is variable, it's not reliable, we need the technology to pick up the slack and move energy where it's required around the system. But because we don't know where it's required around the system, we're going to create a bunch of synthetic data in order to essentially make up what we think should be happening. The potential for a disaster here is difficult to overstate, to be honest with you. This organization is deeply embedded into central government. They've been working with Apolitical Foundation, who I've spoken about previously, and 3CI, who I've spoken about previously, to create training to reframe and re-educate politicians and civil servants. So this is just launched. It's the Introduction to the Energy Transition course, and it's about understanding the importance of the energy transition, understanding infrastructure, technology investment and the workforce, stakeholder roles and collaboration, and governance for clean energy solutions, basically training people in how this captive public-private marketplace runs. And then when local authority people or people from central government want to make an investment in this marketplace, they can go to this new organization, which just popped up this week, which is the Innovation Procurement Empowerment Centre, which is going to be helping local authorities spend the £60 billion a year that they have on green investments. They talk about this as being a significant lever that public authorities can use to create and shape markets. Who knew that that's what councils were supposed to be doing? And that is also being run by Connected Places Catapult, where Lucy Yu, who I've spoken about a second ago, is an advisor. And also it's run by UK Research and Investment, which sits under the auspices of Patrick Balance, both of those people going straight back up to the Blair Institute and Tony Blair. So that is just one example of what's going on right now in the health system as chaos reigns on the streets, or in the energy system as chaos reigns on the streets.
Ben, thank you very much for that report. Well, incredibly important report you've just given, because it's showing how, once again, the nation state is getting the raw end of the globalist agenda. They think they can control everything in the world. King Charles thinks he can control space as well. How do we deal with this? We've got to deal with it in an educated way, and we will be discussing that very thing in UK column extra coming up in just a few minutes. Diane, I'm going to say I think we'll hold your report on the elections in the state, and we'll bring it into UK column extra because we want to have a good discussion about the facts that you've got for us today. So I'm going to say to our audience, thank you very much for joining us. We think that we are now into an extremely dangerous phase, not only in UK but worldwide, as we see these vicious conflicts unfold. And it's very clear that the globalist government system wants to destroy our livelihoods. It wants to destroy the nation state, and it wants to destroy communities as we've historically known them. So at the end of the day, if you are out, or you have been out over the weekend involved in violence, you're actually helping this agenda. We need to deal with the problem in a completely different way. So please join us, if you can, for UK column extra, and we'll talk through some of the things that people can and should do. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.